kickstart the conversation. So good afternoon, good evening, good morning as well to everyone, depending on where you are joining us from. So welcome to today's webinar, which is hosted by the Africa-China Center for Policy and Advisory. We've been, getting busy trying to put together conversations that borders around Africa and China cooperation or relations. We understand that a lot of debate, a lot of nuances regarding the kind of partnership or cooperation or relation that China or Africa has with China. Different angles, different scenarios has been put out there, but it's always important to get an African perspective of really what's happening on the ground. We as an African, how do we perceive our relationship with China when it comes to trade and investment? So at the center, what we do is to put together some of these platforms to share perspective, especially as we try to speak to people or experts that have experiences with China, whether through education or through work or through research. And of course, they are also African. So basically, that's what we're going to be doing today. I'll take the next few minutes to just do a quick intro of who we are as a center. So the Africa-China Center, we are a policy, research, and advisory firm. We are a think tank, which is based headquartered here in Accra, Ghana. And we are dedicated to providing unbiased policy and market research. And we do this by offering strategic guidance regarding China and Africa, covering multiple sectors and industries. So basically, we are a center. We do producing research and insights and policy briefs, and also trying to also help private businesses that wants to access the African market. Chinese want to access African markets, as well as Africans who want to get access to the Chinese market. So basically, that's what we're doing. And of course, we hope that as we progress as a think tank, we get to help African government to streamline their policies and ensure that the kind of benefit that are accruing from China is mutually beneficial, and of course benefits the African people. That's our core interest as a policy think tank, how we are going to be positioning Africa, how we can help the policy space in terms of discussions and debates, and putting together and putting forward very insightful research that can guide the day-to-day policies of African governments in their relations with China. So that's who we are. Of course, we strive as a think tank to be very transparent, to be independent, which is very key. And of course, we're striving for more partnerships, both public, private side. And of course, yes, who has raised his hand? Sorry. Hi, Barrister Jefferson, do you have anything to say? Hello? Okay, so it's just a mistake, right? So yeah, that is who we are as a think tank. We do research, we do advocacy because it's very important. We try to, like we're doing now, we want to do some advocacy work, trying to help put forward, unbiased insight that is going to help shape, what is happening between Africa and China. Of course, producing reports and dialogues like the one we are having the coming months and years. We'll be doing more roundtables, breakfast meetings, conferences and summits, and of course, media briefing. These are all part of activity that we'll be doing under our think tank division. And of course, our advisory division, like I said, we're going to help in businesses both in Africa and China to assess markets. So if African businesses want to access China, they can work through us, and as well as Chinese businesses that want to access the African market, they can also work through us. So with that, we have market entry research, we have trade and FDI strategy that we provide, ESG and sustainability, Africa-China policy strategy, customers report for specific industries that potential clients will be looking for. We can do that for you as well. And of course, we'll be introducing a new division called the Study in China Advisory. So here, our aim is to assist as many African students as possible to be able to access education in China, whether paid or through the Chinese government scholarship or through the school scholarship system. So we are building on this. It's not fully launched yet, but we're hoping that this year we'll be launching fully this advisory service to assist more students to access education in China. And we are supported by the ICC, the Institute of Certified Chartered Economists. This is the leading and the foremost professional qualification program for economists. So if you are on this session with us and you're interested in earning a Chartered Economist designation, then of course we recommend the ICC to you. Fortunately for you, I'm also part of the ICC, so I'll be dropping my contact details in the chat box if you have any questions regarding the ICC, or if you want to know more about the Africa-China Center, please feel free to reach out to me and I'll be more than happy to assist you. So thank you for that. That was a bit of by way of introduction to all of you. Now, I'll be happy, Francisco, Kennedy, if you can join me and launch your video and audio so you can join me, perfect. So we are here for a very important conversation, which has been going on for decades now, which borders around on the trade and between Africa and China. As we saw in 2021, there was a record high of $251 billion of trade volume between Africa and China. Now, of course, there are a lot of nuances happening, a lot of new developments happening. Of course, China's outward investments into markets, have been reducing over the period, of course, not just to Africa, but the rest of the world. And of course, we all understand that even now we have a new revived interest in the continent this time around from the US. We witnessed in December when the US hosted the second US African Leaders Summit, which took place in Washington, DC, where the US actually showed it thinks that they're ready to engage the continent this time around, not as an aid or as a charitable continent, where you just supply money for aid and fighting disease. But here they want to come in to do business. They want to see private businesses from US investing and doing business in Africa. So that actually heightens the competition, of course. We all understand the role that China has been playing for the last 30, 40 years in terms of the kind of investment that we've seen in infrastructure across multiple countries on the continent. So obviously we are seeing a lot of dynamics. So we want to understand how going forward we can reimagine the Africa-China Trade and Investment Corporation, how both parties are going to be sharing together going forward into 2023 and beyond. And fortunately for us today, we're very excited to have distinguished guests or speakers who have experiences both in China and of course the Africans themselves to share their perspective with us on this topic. I will be your moderator. My name is Paul Frimpong. I'm the Executive Director here at the Africa-China Center for Policy and Advisory. I'll just introduce briefly our speakers for today. So the first to speak will be Dr. Kennedy Yatha. He is currently the head of economics department at Sino-African University in Tanzania. He is a lecturer, economist, researcher, and consultant in economics and economic related discipline. He is also the head of research department at Avalanche Company Limited. Kennedy has a PhD in applied economics from the Capital University of Economics and Business in Beijing, China, a master's degree in economics from the University of Nairobi in Kenya, and a bachelor's degree in economics from St. Augustine University in Tanzania. So you can see that he's a very global person from Tanzania, did a master's in Kenya, and did his PhD in China. So Kennedy joined the St. Augustine University of Tanzania in August 2008 as a tutorial assistant, and of course, rose through the ranks. In 2009, he received the award scholarship for his master's in Kenya, and of course, in 2016, he got his also scholarship to do the PhD in China at the Capital University of Economics and Business in Beijing. Recently, in 2022, that's our path crossed. He was recognized as one of the most influential young economists in Sub-Saharan Africa by the Institute of Certified Chartered Economists, ICCE. So that is a brief profile about Kennedy. I'll just do the one for Francisco before we progress. So Francisco Miguel Paulo is an economist and researcher. He's an Angolan economist and researcher at the Research Center of the Catholic University of Angola. He holds a master's degree in economics from the Catholic University School of Business in Lisbon. I think that's where he's pursuing his PhD currently. He's involved in research on projects on diversification of the Angolan economy, the Angolan and oil fiscal reform, China-Africa economic relations, the digital economy, and human capital development. Francisco attended as an African scholar the 7th China-Africa Think Tanks Forum held in Beijing from the 4th to 5th July 2018, hosted by the Secretariat of the Chinese Follow-up Committee of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, FOCAC, and jointly organized by the Institute of African Studies at Zhejiang Normal University. Francisco also received and was recognized as one of the most influential young economists in Sub-Saharan Africa by the Institute of Certified Chartered Economists, ICCE, in 2022. So ladies and gentlemen, these are the profiles of our speakers for today. So we're going to start the conversation. Kennedy, are you here? You have to join us if you are there. We'd like to see you so you can, yeah. So we're going to start a conversation with Kennedy. Let me just check on what is going to be. Yeah. So basically, Kennedy's, we'll take the next few minutes, 10, 15 or so minutes to share his broader perspective on very two key issues, which are more linked to geopolitics in a way. So the first one is about the FOCAC, the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation. You all understand, since 2000, this has been the go-to a platform for African leaders in terms of their relationship with China. So the last one was held in Senegal, Dakar in Senegal in 2021. And of course, we've seen tremendous commitment from China. And of course, also seeing the side of Africa when it comes to the FOCAC. We want to understand how that plays into reimagining the Africa-China Trade and Investment Cooperation. And I will tie that with the recent US African Leaders Summit and its implications on China and Africa trade and relations. Because as we know, we've been dealing mostly and more so in terms of trade and investment with China in the last couple of decades. And now the US saying, okay, this continent is dear to us. We are also here to help to trade with Africa, to do business here, and not just throw money here as aid. So those are the dynamics that we are looking at from Kennedy, and after that, I will come to Francisco. So please, Dr. Kennedy, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much, the chairperson of this webinar, Mr. Paul. I'm Dr. Kennedy Wenyagania. After, as you have introduced me, I'm a Tanzanian, and typically I'm an economist, as you have said. And today's webinar is on reimagining Africa, China, especially in the area of trade and investments. And regarding that, actually my work today will be discussing about the Forum on China and Africa Cooperation, its significance in boosting trade and investment in Africa. But also the second part is about the recent United States Africa Leaders Summit and its implications on Africa-China trade. The rest of the members, good evening.
Good evening.
Yeah. I would like to share actually the slides that I have prepared so that we can Yeah, members, I think colleagues, everybody can see
Yes.
a shot of the slides, is it?
Yes, we can see.
Yes, first of all, I would like also to thank the Africa-China Center for Advisor and for Policy and Advisor, being actually run by Mr. Paul. So to begin with, I start with the forum on China. This is the introduction, Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, and being abbreviated as FOCAC. I'll be actually using that as the abbreviation for this, specifically on trade and investment. It is true that by the 1990s, there has been increasing strong willingness of China's enterprises to trade and actually invest in Africa. This one, it is not only from that, but trading and investment through these continents, China and Africa, started a little bit longer, but it came into force as a formal agreement during the October 2000, actually the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation. And this is a continuity of China's agenda towards Africa, which seeks to solidify economic, political, and diplomatic ties. The main agenda about this is actually on about to formalize bilateral agreements between China and Africa to minimize the discourse surrounding China's relations with Africa. There is a lot of things have been said about this relationship. So the FOCAC 200 actually aimed on that, but also to strengthen the Sino-Africa cooperation. To develop economic cooperation and investment and trade ties with the centerpiece actually of the setup of this forum. And therefore, since China got out the policy at the beginning 1990s, trade and investment has experienced a significant growth, making China a leading trade partner for Africa. Oh, sorry. Members, are you there? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Your video is off. If you can turn on your video. Your video is off.
I did.
Yes,
okay.
I can hear you.
Now it's okay. Now the major concern areas of this the forum between China and Africa. This is just a few to mention, but the first one is to boost Sino-Africa trade and investment, cancelling of African countries' debts to China, increasing development aid to Africa, encouraging Chinese companies to invest in Africa. There was also political cooperations and socioeconomic development, open China's market to African exporters, I mean goods that are being taken to China, improve bilateral socioeconomic cooperation. And this one, it was in terms of investing in agriculture, and it was seen as the most targeted sector during the FOCAC 2003. This one was the second one. Another one is investment in infrastructure development. I'm experienced. Okay. I also talk about the achievement of this forum between Africa and China. It's better we know that the FOCAC has worked toward the establishment of a new global political and economic order aiming at enhancing China-Africa economic cooperation. To this end, the increasing number of African presidents attending the FOCAC summits illustrated a rising interest of African continent. There's also tariff exemption to some of the products exported by African countries to China. improved bilateral economic cooperations, as we see that the different Chinese and African ministries have concluded the agreements to encourage preferential market access of products from Africa to China. China has also since financed the roads and railway bidding in many African countries, thereby contributing to their social and economic development of the African continent. Another achievement is the creation of joint ventures to facilitate investment on both sides has been promoted. Many trade agreements have been signed under the World Trading Organization framework to harmonize trade policies between these continents. For trade in services, especially tourism, countries such as Mauritius, Kenya, Seychelles, Zambia, Tunisia, Ethiopia, and Zimbabwe have been granted the approved destination status, allowing Chinese tourists to visit such places. As for investment, FOCAC outlined land and water resources management, agro infrastructure development, food security, manufacturing of farm machinery, etc. Beijing set up policies to financially support the Ministry for Finance and Commerce and the China Exim Bank to develop agricultural projects. China has also provided development assistance to many African countries in terms of hospitals and schools building, but medical aid, just a few to mention. Now come to trade and investment. China's outward foreign direct investment stock to Africa has increased by more than 80% from, you can see the figures, the US dollar million 492 over that one from 2003, where the second FOCAC was actually, the second FOCAC conference was took place by that time. The total volume of Sino-Africa trade amounted to up to more than USD 29 billion, with China's export to Africa accounting for over 13 billion US dollars, and its import from Africa accounting for almost more than 15 US billion. China is the largest provider of FDI, foreign direct investment, supporting hundreds of thousands of African jobs. There's also, in terms of the zero tariff treatment granted to a number of African countries, has also contributed to fuel Africa's exports to China. Okay, all these cannot go without the challenges. Actually, the cooperation faces so many challenges, and these things are actually not avoidable, but to some extent they can be taken care of. It is first interesting to note that China's government is facing challenges in attempting to control the wealth of private entrepreneurs' rate of success, and sometimes driven by mere profit than business ethics in Africa. Less has been done for skill transfer and human resource development of Africans, because for foreign direct investments, especially in Africa, the first priority is on skill transfer and human resource development. But we see that for the Chinese one, little has been done on that area. China's economic rise and modernization necessitated resources from abroad in order to secure development at home. And therefore, this is also another challenge, especially to Africa, though it is addressing to China. You say that China's footprint in Africa's natural resource come with social and environmental consequences for people's livelihood in Africa, just to sustain the economic development and modernization of the Chinese. There are another challenge that Africa still lacks policies aiming to ensure that the Chinese investment in the continent are benefiting Africans. Another challenge is about the third-party challenges. Third-party challenges is, in this case, it is all about the other countries that actually engage with Africa in terms of trade and the development, such as the USA, Russia, Japan, yeah, and the other countries. The challenges also, another one is the trade imbalance between China and Africa. The major export products to China from Africa are oil, copper, coal, iron products, others. And therefore, consequently, the 10 top African countries exporting to China are resource oil-rich countries, while the other countries, they don't get such a loom. It is also true that Africa's imports from China are mainly based those include household equipment, motorcycles, footwear, spare parts, etc. But also, while there is an important presence of Chinese companies operating in Africa, China remains untapped for African companies, with exception to some few companies from South Africa. Another challenge is the Chinese investment are often at high risk. This is the side of the Chinese actually. They are at high risk zones not explored by China and other investors. China will probably need to come up with risk management measures. Yes, many of the Chinese investments, especially in some African countries like Libya, Sudan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, they are at high risk. So this also poses the challenge about this forum and the cooperation between Africa and China. Now, what is the way forward? The way forward, actually, the number one is that Africa needs to take control of its economic development path rather than depending on China and the other parts to come and develop Africa. The number two, African policymakers need to have a stated vision to better engage with China, because while the Chinese are coming in Africa with a very strong agenda, the Africans, in most cases, they don't have a very strong agenda. They just have petty agendas to say that we are cooperating with China, but the issue. Another, that the issue of transparency, corruption, and the governance issues need to be addressed by the focus to ensure public service delivery to people. This one is all about making trust of the beneficiaries of this cooperation between China and Africa. After the issue of transparency, we have seen that, for example, in Kenya, it was an issue until when the new government decided to put everything open regarding the Mombasa, Nairobi railway. Another issue to consider is for imbalanced trade. Policies should be developed on both sides, and especially the establishment of the protectionism measures to regulate China-Africa trade can also contribute to fair trade, but this has to be done in a very sensitive way, because to some extent the protectionism, if it goes beyond the remits, it brings a lot of problems. But for the purpose of making sure that there is trade balance between China and Africa, it is important that it should be there. The future development, for FOCAC, the deepening of the win-win cooperation and the mutual benefits is unavoidable. For this cooperation actually to be sustainable, we need to see a win-win situation within the cooperation. FOCAC also should play a greater role in building a closer African community, China-Africa community, with a shared future. It should not be only directed in one side. There should also be a reduce the sovereign debt burden on African countries. It's true that we have experienced that most of the African countries they have debt burdens, and this one has given other competitors to discuss about this cooperation in a negative way, hoping that the Chinese actually they have an agenda about this in Africa. China should also strictly control the negative environmental effect of its investment and financing in Africa. Yeah, at least they are starting doing this, but in previous it was not in the agenda, and this one also it gave the competitors a room actually to speak about this cooperation. China and Africa should also gently fight back against the discourse headman and the ideology attacks from other competitors. Come now to USC, United States and Africa Leaders Summit, especially the recent one that has been taking place in Washington. I have summarized this and come up with 11 implications to know about US-China rivalry in Africa. The first one, which is the truth, is that Washington is fighting for attention with Beijing and to some extent with Moscow and the other competitors, but I think Beijing and Moscow, they come at the front line. The second one, the second implication is that China is holding forums for this cooperation in every 3 years, starting from 20,000, as Paul initially said in the introduction, and the last one it was held in Dakar, Canada, 2021. Not Canada, Dakar, Senegal. Sorry. This one is actually advancing its interest as compared to the USA, what is doing. The first one actually it was 2014, and from that time, Africa was dumped, and the US has now come to Africa this year, as we all know. China has systematically increased its involvement in Africa for over 20 years now, and this is making huge trades and investment to the extent that now it has become the first trading partner and investment partner to Africa, and as compared to the United States. Number 4, China has far surpassed the US as an economic player in Africa. Number 5, not every Chinese engagement in Africa is awesome. I mean, not only military bases, but also telecommunication and the other. There is awesome that, for example, when the Chinese completed their military base in Djibouti, this one, it was awesome to some blocks of the world, especially United States and the European countries. But it is not about only that. They have invested into other areas also, as the communication and other. Number 6, China's conflict resolution law is unclear, and this one is actually what makes the Chinese to be seen that as if they have their own private agenda. Conflict resolution diplomacy in Africa from China is to some extent not clear. The 7th one, most African countries desire relations with both the United States and China, wanting to avoid fallout from media power rival. Some Africans view China as a positive development model, but the others also they view USC as a positive development model. So this is on the side of the Africa continent. It should be taken and handled in a very careful way to avoid what happened in the past, the Cold War between the United States and the then USSR. Number 8, Africans want to do some business with the United States. They see US as their second home, sure. Number 9, the United States should play to its strength while competing with China. US has a great asset in its large and vibrant African diaspora as compared to China. Number 10, contract transparency is key when it comes to this relationship, whether with China or with the US or with Europe or with Russia. US is considered to be more transparent than China, especially when it comes to issues of democracy and governance. And number 11, and the last one, there are no shortcuts in diplomacy. Sustained follow-up is required. And we have seen that top offshores from China outdo US offshores in visiting Africa, but also in deceiving African offshores. Conclusion now. Just to conclude, in order to develop Africa, it's true that foreign direct investment is needed. And the foreign direct investment, actually, they should come from either China, from either US, from either Russia, from either European Union, but the FDI is very important. China has invested in Africa to sustain its growth and has thereby contributed to the economic rise in Africa. Yet, Chinese outflow foreign direct investment is directed towards Chinese multinationals to secure resources, acquire overseas expertise, and gain new markets. We should also think that African policymakers still lack a stated vision to better engage with China. And actually, this one is not about China, but also about the other competitors who are competing with China. In this area, that we are failing to take, for example, the FOCAC policies and actually include in our policies and the plans. That has been very difficult to maintain. And one of the example is the electric rail that was being built from Addis Ababa to Djibouti, I think. Once the Chinese failed, and that project also failed to be sustained. It is somewhat ironic that the African policymakers turn to China not only for its economic development model, investment and trade, but also for China's efficient bureaucracy. Thank you, guys. That is the end of my short presentation. I've tried to highlight some areas so that I can allow the discussion.
Thank you, Kennedy. Yeah, so we'll get back to you on that. So you touch on two major issues, the FOCAC and how it's playing out in the Africa-China Trade and Investment Corporation. And of course, you touch on the US African Leaders Summit, which is also a very essential part of the relation that China has with Africa, Africa has with China. Those of you who have joined us online, please, you can send us the questions you have. You can use the Q&A button on your screen on the Zoom app, and then send us your questions regarding the conversation that we're having. We'll take our next presentation from Francisco, and he is touching on two basic things. So he's touching on the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, and of course, just opposed with the China's Belt and Road Initiatives. So BRI has come to be one of the major global infrastructure financing model that has the potential of changing connectivity when it comes to infrastructure connectivity across, not just in Africa, from Asia, Africa, and Europe, and it's very huge. It's the volume or the value in terms of the amount of investment that is going in and going to the BRI has never been done before, and this is something that China is championing, and Africa, of course, is at a core part of it. And what is interesting about the BRI, which is very interesting, is that it looks at the connectivity not just along the coastlines or the sort. I mean, inland as well. So even landlocked countries will have the opportunity to have access to roads and rails and all of. So it's very exciting development, and it's been going on for a couple of years now. And of course, we've seen that other countries like Europe also coming out with some global initiatives, kind of to rival or sort of to also come into support what China has already started with the BRI. So we want to understand how that is playing out. And of course, Africa too has the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which is an African-owned agenda of trying to increase, trade among African member countries, to increase the trade between African member countries. So regional integration is a very core part of the AFCFTA, and as an African, I couldn't be more prouder to see that we actually started, the AFTA, and of course, headquartered here in Accra, Ghana, and seeing that in the next couple of years, we're going to see African trading among themselves. So we want to understand how that, together with the BRI and China's relation to Africa, play out. So, Francisco, please, in the next 10 minutes, if we can make it shorter and sweet it out, it would be very nice so that we can get some questions coming in on this. So please, you may take over.
Thank you, Paul, for the invitation. Indeed, as we saw in the Professor Kennedy presentation, Africa as a whole mainly export raw material to China. Not only to China, but to the rest of the world. And in the international market, countries or business will survive if we produce more value-added products. And this African Continental Free Trade Area, in my opinion, is one of the major achievement of the African continent. Major achievement of African continent. Because if we don't trade between ourselves, we will not increase employment in the continent, because only exploring raw material and selling to other continents, we do not add up values. Now, this African Continental Free Trade Area will help the African countries, the African business, to play among themselves, to play among us, first of all, and even to develop what is called the regional value chain. Whereas, for instance, Angola produces oil, but we can have a refinery of oil in South Africa or in Namibia, where they have more industrial capability, and this will increase the overall production, the value-added production of the oil. So far, it is good to know that the African Continental Free Trade Area is already operating, although the 54 countries ratified, only so far 8 countries that are now trading among themselves, because these 8 countries, they were able to not only ratify the agreement itself, but also they submitted the tariff conception that will allow the country member to operate. Countries such as Cameroon, Egypt, Ghana, Kenya, Mauritius, Rwanda, Tanzania, and Tunisia are already trading under the African Continental Free Trade Area. Now, what China can do, or what we can learn from China. China itself, China also is interested in seeing Africa to be able to develop its industrial capabilities. Because if the model that only African export raw material to China continue, there will always be rumor that these trade relations are not fair, because one is selling low value-added product, whereas other is importing higher value-added product. In the Dakar Forum, in one of the promises that China made is to helped Africa to promote its trade and is committed to help the African Continental Free Trade Area to continue to help African countries to trade between themselves. Now, talking about the Road and Belt Initiative, infrastructures are key for trade flows. We need roads, we need ports, we need railways in order to transport especially goods. African as all, we have a program that is called Program Infrastructure Development for Africa, that is under African Development Bank. And this program will require investment, money to be able to be funded. The Road and Belt Initiative, first of all, was designed when the Chinese government designed this, was for the Asian countries to be able to connect Asian countries to promote the trade between themselves. But this was expanded to other countries, and Africa also is included. And for the Road and Belt Initiative, the Asian Investment Infrastructure Bank was established in order to fund the projects that go through this Road and Belt Initiative. Now, I think that there can be a collaboration. I think it is. There is a collaboration between African Development Bank and the Asian Investment Infrastructure Bank in such a way that the African Development Bank can have access to these funds and help the African countries to be able to build the infrastructure that they need, mainly road, to connect, contribute to themselves, that will boost trade and transportation and logistics. And we can learn from China in this aspect. But it's important that African as all, especially the political leader, to sit down and negotiate with China in order that, not only with China, with any other development partner, the construction of infrastructure in Africa on each region must have the same standards in order to allow connectivity. If we're speaking about railways, if we have a railway that can link, let's say, from South Africa to Congo or even to Egypt, it's important that the rail itself must be connected. And when we're talking about infrastructures, it's important that the country as a whole be seated together and be able to discuss what they need. Because if we are like, if you notice, Paul, most of discussion that, most of the trade and investment that happens between China and African country, most of them are bilateral trades, bilateral. And beside having these common forums such as SADC, but most of agreement are bilateral agreement. China is a giant in the world. It is important for many projects such as infrastructure, the approach must be as a region itself, as the African continent. We have the African Union, then African Union representing all African countries. First of all, the African country themselves must sit and decide which infrastructure that we need. And that was always been done because this program for investment, the program for infrastructure development for Africa is already set, exists since 2010. And we know what we need to link, for instance, South Africa to Egypt, either through roads or through railways. We know what we need. Now, it's important that the country itself sit down and negotiate with China as a bloc, as the continent, or other between regional bloc. We have SADC, we have ECOWAS, we have the Eastern African community, but it's important that the negotiation for the important project must not be only bilateral, but as a region as a whole, to benefit, and in order to have the benefit of this negotiation as the continent itself, not only bilateral. And in my understanding, the African free trade area will help in this regard, because the Africans are moving toward one single market. And this will help us as a region, as a continent, to be able to negotiate with other partners such as China. And I'm sure that China itself is not afraid of the zone itself, because it will be good for China if Africa also have the same level of the development, because trade flows are sustainable when the countries or when the region have the same level of development. They can trade goods, not only raw material, but value-added good that can help the two countries or the two regions to develop. Paul, I think I can stop from here and wait for a question from the audience.
Yes, thank you very much, Francisco. That was very brief, but very insightful, linking the Africa Continental Free Trade Area to that of the Belt and Road Initiative of China. So I will start. I have some questions there. I think we have about 2 questions or so. I will get to that, but before that, I will start with you. So the question is, would you say that African countries are getting prepared enough to play an active role in the BRI initiative? So yes, we understand the impact, the extent of this BRI. We understand the nature of investment that is going into the BRI led by China. But how do you see the position of Africa? I mean, as you sift through the narrative that are happening, as you try to understand the conversation at the continental level, we know that in Asia, there already a lot of investment going on. Rails connecting one country to the other is already happening there in so many of the countries there. Would you say that Africa is ready to actually connect more based on infrastructure? As you said, the program for infrastructure investment for Africa has already been there since 2010. So we know the energy poverty that we have, the road network, the rails, the telecommunication. We don't know all the infrastructure that we need. So would you say that we are prepared and we've placed our best foot forward in terms of the BRI for China?
I think among ourselves, what is lacking is cooperation between African countries themselves, first of all. Because as I said, when we are talking about infrastructure that will link all region or continent, we must guarantee or must be sure that there will be connectivity of the infrastructure itself.
Okay.
For what I see, unfortunately, there is a lack of cooperation among ourselves.
Yeah.
When we go for these meetings, for multilateral meetings between African continent and China, let's say, for instance, I'll give you an example. When I attended the forum, the think tank forum of when the Chinese invited African scholars, were almost 50 African scholars, different subjects. We went in Beijing in 2018 to prepare the agenda, since in October in that year, China hosted the FOCAC forum in Beijing. But first of all, they called us as African scholars to understand what our views are on the corporations and talk to them. Yeah. But I did not see the same arrangement, the African, because we are African. It is important also the African leaders to call African academians, researchers, to see what they can do, what they can help, to be prepared in this kind of, to go prepared in this kind of summit. There must be a meeting between ourselves. And in the Road and the Belt Initiative, as you said, the program is already set, but it's important that the countries, for instance, in terms of the railway, I'll give an example between Angola and Zambia. Zambia does not have a sea, as you know, and to be able to export most of the product, there is what we call Lubito corridor, that we have the railways that goes from Bengala, that is a province with sea in Angola, that can link to Zambia. In the colonial time, that that corridor work well. And it's important in the road build initiative, Angola and Jamba or SADC itself can negotiate with China to see how much do we need, in order to, through African Development Bank, we can get access to these funds to be able to find the rail that we need, the roads, and also the power grid, that is electricity. We have the example of Congo. We have the dam of Inga that is able to give electricity to most of Southern African countries. But we need investment in order to have this connectivity done.
Okay, so you believe that broader conversations among Africans ourselves, trying to make our case, trying to, like you said, you already experienced this from the China side where you were there in 2018, where they wanted to hear perspective of African scholars, but the opposite was not done here on the continent, which is quite interesting. And each president and their team goes to FOCAC alone to go and have their bilateral conversation, when we could have actually understand ourselves, talk among ourselves and try to take a position and present our position that this is what is required of us in terms of our infrastructure. I think that that's a very critical point, and we're hoping that as we progress in some of these conversations, this information will get across to the people that need to have access to it. Yeah. Dr. Kennedy, there's a question for you. So if you can join us online, that would be great. So Freddie is based in Dar es Salaam. He's part of our team members. He's a research associate at the Africa-China Center for Policy based in Dar es Salaam. So he's asking, so after Xi Jinping being elected as the president last year, first president to visit was your president, Her Excellency Samia Suluhu, Tanzania. What benefit did Tanzania obtain from such a visit on the trade and investment? So this is Tanzania specific. So remember, your president was the first to visit President Xi when in last year. So Freddie wants to find out if there was any major development that came out of that, and how that is playing out in terms of trade.
Oh, thank you, Paul. Thank you very much for that. Actually, a very nice question. First of all, I'd like to say that it's true. My president met with Xi Jinping, and this actually it was meant purposely, because in Tanzania, the Chinese actually they have invested a lot. And they are continuing actually to invest, but also there are some major projects that actually are going on in my country. I will mention them later on, but also there are discussions about how to harmonize the issues of trade, especially export and imports of goods and services between these countries. Recently in Tanzania, we have like 3 major projects that are going on. The first project we are constructing, we call it the SGR, standard gauge railway. Yeah, this one is actually from Dar es Salaam to Mwanza, a distance of about more than 1,200 kilometers. Okay. Yeah, and the major players in within this project are the Chinese. So once my president was meeting with the President Xi Jinping, it's because that the way it was planned, this project was initiated by our late President John Magufuli. I think you are all aware of that. And President Magufuli knew how actually to deal with this, and had a focus that when will this project end up. But after his death, some of the issues happened in between, and to that matter, it necessitated our negotiations to come out again, so that to make sure this project is actually completed. And just another project that we have actually is for building an electricity power plant that will be able to supply not only Tanzania, but also some neighboring countries, including Kenya, Uganda, and Zambia. And this project, by now, it is almost more than 60-something% complete, but it is not yet being completed. So I think Samia meeting with this was also one of the things to discuss, that how now we can actually complete that project. We also have another issue, is the issue of COVID. Despite the fact that COVID-19 didn't hit Tanzania to that extent, but it is there, and actually it is the thing that we needed to negotiate. And remember that China is almost, I think, the first country that is helping African countries in terms of vaccines. And it has almost supplied more than 1 billion vaccines to Africa, and which costed more than 10 billion USD, United States dollars, to Africa. And so with the issue of vaccines, still Tanzania, we are still struggling. We received some of the vaccines in the previous, but we didn't reach the target for people to be vaccinated, and that issue. We have also an issue, and recently it happened about transporting, exporting our agricultural products to China, and there's, to some extent, they slowed down, and the reason to China, it was about the COVID, that China, they are dealing with their internal issue of COVID-19, and therefore from that point, many of the products that were being exported to China didn't get an access to the market. But we all know that recently China has lifted the ban about the COVID-19, and it was now very important for my president actually to meet the President Xi, so that we can see how they can how now we can come up with this trade, that now the the Tanzanian products, they get access into Chinese market. It reached the state that most of our products, especially like avocado and the rest, they were just dumped in the dumped outside in the markets because of lack of actually a sustainable market within the country, and it was an issue. So for Samia, meeting with Xi Jinping, it was a good idea. But it is also important to remember that the trade volume between Tanzania and China has increased nearly by 50-fold, from less than USD 100 million in 2000 to almost 1.4 billion in 2020. And the accumulation of investment of Chinese companies in Tanzania has exceeded almost more than USD $7 billion, with more than 700 investment projects, the Chinese ones, that are going through my country. So meeting with China, you can see now, having all these issues about investment, trade, employment, etc. It was a very good chance now for President Samia Hassan Suluhu actually to talk with Xi, so that how the business can go on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was very detailed. So now we get a bigger picture of what actually is transpiring between China and Tanzania. I'm very excited about the SGI project that you mentioned, the standard gauge rate project that you mentioned. Of course, I think I was in Dar es Salaam in June. So in June, I was in Dar es Salaam, and I saw that the real. So I didn't know it was under Chinese management, but I was there, and I saw it as I was driving to Dar es Salaam. So it's very, very much needed, and we hope that this project will be completed according to schedule, and of course, each party will be responsible for their role in that. So thank you very much for giving us that broader sense of what's happening in China, in Tanzania, in terms of trade and investment relations with China. So I'll go to the next question here. This one is from Tembekile. I think I mentioned the name right or wrong. I don't know. Forgive me if I got it wrong. So basically, Tembekile is asking about China, US. So any of you can answer, even though I think Kennedy, you mentioned about this. I have a question that will go to Francisco as well, but this one is open, so any of you can make your point. So he's mentioning that that he or she is saying that the two countries like China and US are competing for a bigger slice of Africa, business of Africa. Business happens to be the top carbon polluters in the world. As we know, the more industrialized you are, the more you would have contributed to the carbon emission and the climate change issue that we are having here. So we all understand the numbers. We've seen that low-income countries like in Africa, we contribute less, but of course, more is demanded of us to all this conversation about climate change and net zero targets, and of course, energy transition, even though we have our own energy challenges that we need to solve first before we talk about it. But that's another debate. So person is asking, so what would be your approach in addressing, what would be the approach in addressing ESG, which is environment, social governance, modeling on responsible investing, and addressing the issue of loss of damage of funds for Africa as related to the global warming issues. And so that's the point I was making. So this is in line to what I was saying. So the person is asking about responsible investing, because the two major powers, US and China, they are aggressively interested and of course are investing in Africa. And that has to do with, of course, once you're investing, it depends on which sectors in the US are investing, but we're talking about carbon emission. So the person is asking about how do we tackle the issue of responsible investing. And secondly, in the conversation of the climate change and action that are required in energy transition, we're looking at loss and damage funds for Africa, because you already started doing some investment in certain areas in terms of especially the energy side, and now we'll be required to move to renewable and green. So how do we deal with that? I don't know if any of you have come across some of these conversations. So the floor is open if any of you have comments to make on this. Yeah.
Okay, maybe I can start to talk about that. Yeah. Thank you. It's true that the issue of actual environmental issues, they have been at the center of the discussion actually to every investment and the trade that is being done, not only in Africa but worldwide. And as the one who is asking question is saying, even in US and in China, it is also an issue. And I have elaborated in my slides that one of the challenges actually of the Chinese investments in Africa, it was the issue of environment. They were not that much concerned with the environmental issues just for the sake of their economic development and modernization. As you have said, it's true that the economic development and modernization, it comes with a negative environmental impact, and that impact tends to have a trickle down from actually the developed countries to the developing countries. So even when they bring investments in Africa, to some extent, you find that the issue of environmental issues is not taken care. But for the very recent FOCAC conference that was held in Dakar, Senegal. Agenda number 6 of the Chinese, it was the promise on green development programs in Africa. And it was said that China will undertake almost 10 development, green development, environmental protection, and climate actions project for Africa. It will also support the development of Great Green Wall, and it will also build centers for excellence on low carbon development and climate change adaptation in Africa. You can see now they're starting to see that commitment in Africa, especially for China, as I have elaborated, that initially they had no these issues of environmental issues, despite the fact that it is a promise, but it is now the African side to take serious about this issue. And actually, when it comes to the next, it will be the 9th one, the next conference of FOCOC, when they will be actually analyzing the outcomes of the Dakar conference. One of the African agenda to push, it should be this agenda number 6 of the green development programs in Africa of the Chinese. For the US, I think the Chinese, when they go, I'm not sure that it was one of the agenda when they met with the President Joe Biden, but from the experience of the Chinese investment in Africa regarding environment, actually it was supposed to be the forefront agenda in that discussion. So it is a two-way play. While they are promising, the African should make a follow-up to make sure that we don't reach to that extent of these climate issues. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. Francisco, do you have a comment on that?
Yes, I think both China, most of the developed country, they know well, they are aware that the current business model that is more damaging to the environment is not sustainable for all the world. Although China and the US are the major polluter in the world, but they are concerned. And when I saw this on the agenda in Dakar, when the Chinese president bring it that promote green or ecological green economy or development in Africa, some actually some might think that this must be hypocrisy because China or the US itself, when they develop, they pollute a lot. Yes, it is true, they pollute a lot. But since we are latecomers, I think we should not commit the same mistake, because I cannot commit the same mistake because the other commit the same mistake. And today, now what Africa can do is ask these countries to help them to have access to the green technology that is less damaging to the environment, because those technology are expensive. Then we can have this technology, and it is possible for African also to operate this technology. Then when it's talking about green economics or ecological, it is important for all mankind. And I think we should move forward on this.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, sure. Thank you very much. So I have a question. And Tembekile, yes, okay, you are a he. All right. Thank you very much for the correction. Yeah, thanks. I assume you're from South Africa. Yeah, I'm sure. So there's a question here from Sarah Boateng. So it appears the Chinese, our trading partners, know clearly their interest, but unfortunately, same cannot be said for Africa as a continent. How do we maintain fair or equity and engagement to advance development and growth? I think this question goes to Francisco. So she's asking about, a situation where as a continent, you're dealing with a partner that knows exactly what it wants. This, at least where it seems not to have a flow of exactly what you want. So how do we balance this to ensure that we have a fair or at least equitable trade engagement with China?
Yeah, cooperation between ourselves, between African first of all, because we know in the international agenda, in order to have a bargaining power, we need to be united. Look at the EU, the Europeans. They foreign policies, they do it as a bloc to protect their own region. We also, as African, we should do that. And we have mechanisms for these dialogues. We have the African Union itself. We have the regional economic region. In the case of the Southern Africa, we have SADC. SADC is a well-structured region in terms of its sectorate. But it's important that when we are talking about China, especially when talking about infrastructures, it is important that African countries must sit together and go to China with a common agenda and say what they want and how they want it to be done in order to ensure that the standard is the same. But unfortunately, due to, how can I say, due to short-sighted vision, some African countries, or most of them, they prefer doing bilateral agreement with China. And those bilateral agreements are not good in medium and long term because they will not help the country itself and they will not help the continent. It is important we as Africans, first of all, meet together and have understanding what we want and to engage with our partner in this regard.
I think this is tied to a question from David. David is also with the Africa-China Center for Policy. He's a senior research fellow here. So he's asking whether it would be better for Africa to engage China through the AFCFTA or individual. I think briefly, just 1 minute.
Yeah, briefly, I think it is in the middle long term, it is better to do it under FST, after African Continental Free Trade, because this mechanism will boost regional trade and develop regional chain values. It will help the continent in a long term, because doing it individually is not sustainable for the countries in long term and for the continent as a whole.
Yeah, so I'll just ask my last question and then we can wrap it up. So my last question goes to both of you is to, so at the Africa-China Center for Policy and Advisory, as I said earlier, our aim is to put together and put forward insights and reports from the African perspective in terms of the cooperation with China, right? So we've been out of the conversation, even though it's about us, but hardly do you see an more African perspective, and that's why we excited to have two individuals like you have experience with China, and of course you Africans as well. So my question to you both is this, which is the last comment that you make, and then we can wrap up. How do you see going forward the cooperation, the trade and investment cooperation with China in 2023 and beyond? Is there anything that you like to see Africa do more with China and vice versa? So that's just my last question for you guys. So tell me, what do you see and what do you anticipate is going to happen between Africa and China in 2020? Now that especially China has opened up, that people cannot travel to China without any form of restriction, as it was announced in December and now in full action in January. What do you see in the trade and investment relation with China in 2020 and beyond? Just briefly.
Okay, I think I can start since.
Yeah.
And if this cooperation or the relationship between Africa and China will last, because China, as emerging countries, is one of the countries that some African country, most of African country can relate to, because they can imitate the way that they develop its economy and the way that they are helping their citizens to lift up from poverty. Yeah. And there is, as Professor Kennedy said, comparing the world power, China is amazing. In less than 20 years, is involved in all African countries, in all continent, and with a lot of investment, because they are market oriented. They want to do business. They know what we want. Now it is important we also as African know what we want. Because we have bargaining power, we have raw materials, we have what they need. Then also we can also demand to see what we need also in order that this relationship can last. Because if the current model of raw material, Africa exporting raw material and importing value-added product from China, that will not last. The cooperation not last. It's important to African also to start selling to China value-added product, and the FCT can help in this regard.
Great. Thank you very much for your comment from the school. Yes, Kennedy, please.
Yes, I can also add on that. As the last speaker said, actually, there is hope. There is hope. There's hope. There's a great hope, actually, not only hope. Because why? Because first of all, we should remember that we are in a globalized world, whereby it's like if we are living in one village, and therefore we need such kind of cooperations. From that globalized world, it's true that, as I've mentioned in my slides, the way forward, the issue of foreign direct investment is unavoidable when it comes to the economic development. Many studies have shown that the foreign direct investment actually they contribute to economic development of a particular country and a particular region, actually, because when they come to bridge the serving gap that is within the country, and actually they cut the vicious cycle of poverty. So when they interfere there, actually they start steering economic development of a particular country. That's one. But the second thing is that we need trade. As I've said, that we are in a globalized way, we have goods and services that we are producing, regardless whether they are natural products or manufactured products, but they need to reach the market. And therefore, where can we get these markets while a country is trying to take up for its economic development? We need these cooperations actually. And for Chinese, as the last speaker said, is a big country, by the way, and not only a big country by now, it is hoped to be also a big country in the future. Because you can see, for example, its engagement in Africa within only 20 years, it has surpassed America in so many issues, especially when it comes to foreign direct investment and trade, leave alone the issues of democracy and the governance. And this actually is where the African government taking advantage of seeing, of having hope with China rather than with America, because they don't want to be interfered when it comes to that issue. But there is one thing to do. Before that, we see that it's only one country that is not in cooperation with China, and this one is the Eswatini, because of being with the diplomatic ties with Taiwan, I think, and you know about this when it comes to China, it's very serious on that. So for Africa, what we have to do, because the tool is there now, how to use this tool? First of all, the diverse national conditions, as it has been said by the last speaker, this one needed to be worked on. Actually, within the countries itself, Africa should speak as one. Africa should speak as one country, and but if they go there as 54 countries, every country is having its own desires, its own whatever the case, and it is very easy to be divided and ruled. But through the African Union, Africa should speak as one, and Africa will continue as one continent, the way Europe did. You can see that is the condition number one. But also the condition number two is that despite the fact that we are going to be one by removing these diverse national conditions, we need to have a strong agenda when we approach those guys, whether it is America or it is Chinese. We need to have a very strong agenda in terms of policies and in terms of plans. What we should express actually what Africa wants, and sometimes it is not about what leaders want, because in economics, if you define development, we say in its real sense, it is when you lift up the poor people. When you lift up the poor people, that it counts more to development rather than lifting the middle or whatever the case. So once they are there, they should see the areas that can lift the poor people of the African nations. And to start with how to lift these people, we should be also start in our own home. Before cleaning other houses, you should start cleaning your house. We have so many barriers within ourselves, yet we want to go out, we want to go abroad. How can it be possible? So we need those issues actually, but 100% there is hope. If you can see the data, the way Africa has invested, the way China has invested in Africa within these years, actually the problem is ours. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Kennedy. So all in all, we've come to the end of today's session, and we were very privileged and fortunate to have gotten the opportunity to interact with these two level-headed individuals who have experience with China and, of course, the Africans. So we have Dr. Kennedy, who is based in Tanzania, Dar es Salaam. We have Francisco from Angola, but currently based in Lisbon in Portugal. And of course, me here from the Africa-China Center for Policy and Advisory. So we'll be coming your way. Once you join, that means that we have access to your details. You'll be getting email from us. This session was recorded. We will make it available via YouTube channel, and we'll share it or make it available on our website and our social media platforms as well. And of course, we'll send it by email to all of you, so we can just get to rewatch and of course share with your network as well, or revisit it anytime you want to have a broader understanding of what's happening between Africa and China in terms of trade and investment. So much thank all of you, first to our speakers, and of course to all the audience that joined and the questions that came in. I first put up my email address, so in case you have further questions, please, you can always reach out for AfricaChinaCenter.org. You can always reach me via email, and I'll be more than happy to direct your question to our speakers. And of course, if I'm in the position to answer, I can help you as well. So we are new, but we want to champion an African narrative when it comes to Africa-China cooperation. And we look forward to working with all of you, partners, organizations that have interest in the focus that we have, which is Africa-China. If you're an organization that has interest in this area, we welcome you. I would like to interact and see what we can collaborate and leverage on our individual or organizational expertise. So thank you, and we'll come with you again with our next webinar, which is on February 28th. So with that, we are delving deeper into the US-Africa-China, US-Africa Leaders Summit that was held in December. We want to go deeper into that and see how that can change the dynamics in terms of China's strategy to the continent. So thank you very much, and all the best. Enjoy the rest of your week. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.